Prime Minister into the hall was the party's state president, Andrew Peacock. At the age of 27, Peacock sits on both the party's federal executive and on its federal policy committee. 30 years separate him from Mr. Holt.
In the mid-1960s, Andrew Peacock and John Howard were young activists in the Liberal Party. These were confident days.
So we'll go further down the street.
So far, the Liberal Party has been remarkably free of internal disputes and faction fights.
Our best years are ahead of us, not behind us.
But as they grew older, Peacock and Howard experienced a different kind of Liberal history.
I had seen the Liberal Party's history littered with challenges. I had seen Fraser challenge Snetton, I'd seen Peacock challenge Fraser with no good reason at all. I mean, Fraser had won 3 elections in a row.
I have always tried to be pretty supportive of people I was around. I got fed up with the Fraser government and stood against Malcolm. And I had no differences with John, who had his differences with me. But I mean, there breaks with the norm for me.
In the 1980s, Liberals divided around these two men who had devoted their lives to the party. They also experienced their longest period out of office since Robert Menzies first led them into government.
You don't know what you're talking about. In a sense, the Liberal Party was made for government under an unchallenged leader. The Liberal Party's got a bad structure for opposition.
Let me just have a word about monetarism and monetary control first.
In the 1980s, there was a new movement in global politics. Its prophets were Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher.
Rather than punish success, rather than raise taxes, let's challenge America in the next 76 days to raise her sights and reach for greatness. Let's go for growth and let's go for the gold.
Its doctrines were free markets, privatisation and global competition.
The Adam Smith Club dines every few months. Its members believe in free enterprise, free trade and freedom from government interference.
In this atmosphere, the Liberal Party was redefining itself and prepared a post-mortem on the Fraser government.
It was the dawn in Australia, anyway, on the Liberal Party, of the economic rationalists and the free market and that sort of thing. And that was beginning to get free rein. And there was a strong theme of that in that report we did 10 years ago. And it was almost, I suspect, when I look back now, the launching pad of that philosophy in the wake of the Fraser years.
But while experimenting with new ideas, the party chose a traditional consensus leader. Andrew Peacock defeated John Howard, the man most closely identified with the new movement.
You've got to understand that many people felt a certain sense of frustration about the last couple of years of being in government, a sense that of unrealised expectations.
John, from the moment he lost the leadership after the 1983 election, was never the same John Howard I knew before that. After I defeated him for the leadership in 83, I was dealing with someone who was not the person I'd anticipated I'd be dealing with.
Rival camps quickly formed around the two leaders. The strong Howard supporters didn't accept Peacock.
I thought he was too ready to blow with the breeze. I didn't feel he was a leader of a country in economic crisis.
All policies will be based on what is best for Australia and for Australians.
Peacock publicly accepted the need for policy change, and his supporters felt Howard could not win an election.
I've both got a plus and minus ledger when I talk about John Howard. I think he will be remembered by history as being a very influential policy person in the 80s. On the negative side, I think he was a wrecker in terms of Liberal Party politics.
And that the big change that is needed to our tax system is to take the load off personal tax and to shift to indirect tax.
What John would do would be stretch the so-called outer limits of policy in his own mind so that he felt was within policy, but to most of us it was foraging in new fields, and it made it very difficult for the shadow ministers, and it was constantly destabilising to me because people would say, he's challenging the leader for this policy, etc. And then this would lead to, on occasions, an almighty argument, and you'd point out as clinically as possible, where this differentiated with the policy. But, it's a bit like someone looking at a white wall and saying it's black.
It was reported in the media generally that Howard was breaking new ground, Howard was setting out a new agenda, and the media would then speculate as to the leadership tension between the two men. I believe John's always operated like that. Whether consciously or unconsciously, you'd have to ask him.
It would be correct to say that I wanted, in those first 2 years after we went into opposition, I wanted to shift the party's policy in a number of areas, and I plead guilty to that quite readily. The reason is that I think the policy needed to be shifted. We're saying that those who want choice, those who want freedom for enterprise-level bargaining ought to be allowed to do so. And
by 1983, John Howard's main policy target was industrial relations.
What I was doing was staking out my own views quite deliberately, with the deliberate intention of shifting the Liberal Party's attitude, and I don't make any apology for that.
I was furious because I was the shadow minister, I was devising policy, Howard was the treasurer. It wasn't for him to be talking in detail on policy areas of industrial relations which I was in the process of preparing and taking to the party.
The Dry's legacy has been a major contributing factor to the Liberal Party defeats, because they weren't prepared to argue their case within the confines of the party.
The calling of this early, unnecessary and to date insufficiently explained election will leave a stamp of cynicism in the minds of most Australians.
In 1984, Bob Hawke called an early election.
Despite the disunity within the coalition, Peacock has refused to give in. He's crossed the country at a frightening pace.
As the campaign got underway, the Liberal Party celebrated its 40th anniversary.
Dame Pattie Menzies. It was her husband, Mr. R.G. Menzies, who forged the Liberal Party soon after an historic Canberra conference this very week, 40 years ago. There's Dame Zara Bate.
For John Howard, the occasion is remembered for some unexpected encouragement from his former boss.
During the course of the dinner, Malcolm said, "You've got to run against Andrew and knock him off." I said, "I can't do that. It's ridiculous, the election campaigns. I mean, it's just unthinkable. An election campaign started, etc., etc." He said, "Oh, well, look, he's got no hope of winning. You'll get annihilated for all, and what will happen to the party?"
Yeah, I was aware of that. It was a bit distracting, to put it mildly.
Do you really think that all you hundreds, over 1,000 people here today, do you really think you're going to be consulted after an election by the incoming government? Of course you're not.
I felt that if we didn't put up a good show in '84, it could be the end of the party. We were in very bad shape. In fact, as it turned out, the '84 election was a close-run event.
Peacock secured a 1.4% swing against Labor.
The resurgence was as I felt it throughout the nation, and if I can do that in 50 days, just think of what I'll do in the next 1,000. Thank you all.
Mr. Peacock had no doubt he would lead until the next election.
I think I could say that it's as certain as night follows day that I'll remain leader, and I wouldn't have a bar of any other view.
Mr. Howard, could I ask you, would you rule out a challenge to Mr. Peacock before the next election?
Look, I think somebody who's had the track record of loyalty that I've had to the cause of the Liberal Party is not really required to answer that question.
Despite the result, Howard was privately attacking Peacock. The day after the poll, John Howard revealed his feelings to a journalist.
I rang him about 9 a.m. and I said, "G'day, John, it's Peter Rees here." He greeted me very warmly. It surprised me, in fact. It then became clear sometime later that he, in fact, thought he was talking to Peter Reith, his Liberal colleague who'd been elected the day before for the seat of Flinders. I asked him what he thought, of the election outcome, and he said, well, we've been directionless under Andrew Peacock now for 18 months. Nobody knows what he stands for. He's had his chance.
I'm not going to deny it. I mean, my position was that I had reservations about the way in which the party was being led. I was not, I expressed those reservations from time to time, as people do in talking to colleagues and other trusted people, and it's hypocritical of any politician to deny that. I mean, you don't live a monastic existence.
Compared to other leadership contenders and leaders and the like, I've said very little, if anything, on the public record about my own period. But the Liberal Party in 1985 did itself a great deal of harm, those members who plotted against my leadership, because we'd done well in 1984.
Key delegates from business and industrial groups arrived early today for a pre-summit meeting.
In the new parliament, the Labor Party continued its own move to the right.
A consumption tax was the centre of debate today. Most business groups supported it. The welfare groups, the consumer groups and the disabled rejected it.
What has to be understood, I think, is that by cutting out the broad-based consumption tax, you cut out the heart of the package.
Labor's embrace of the economic reform agenda threw the Liberals off balance.
In tax rates.
I support very strongly the broadening of the tax base with compensating reductions in income tax, and I'm very glad that Mr Keating and Mr Hawke have now, after their earlier bitter opposition to such an idea, have now moved in that direction. On one occasion, around the time of the tax summit, Andrew called me in and said, look, you're getting too close to Keating on this issue. You haven't landed a glove on him. And subsequently there was a story in a newspaper to the effect that I'd been hauled over the coals over it. And it was fairly obvious from what I was told that it had come out of his office.
One of the difficulties that arose was that their own private offices became very dedicated to the cause of their respective leaders in a way which was actually unhelpful to the Liberal Party. It was almost like two different political parties having these two offices campaigning so strongly for their individual leaders.
The Liberal Party today elected a new president at its Federal Council meeting in Canberra, and he immediately triggered a controversy.
Conflict intensified when the new Liberal president was asked whether a challenge to Peacock could be ruled out under any circumstances.
Well, I suppose you can never rule out under any circumstances because you don't know what those circumstances might be, but...
It was just an indication to me that I was saddled with a federal president who was going to ensure that I didn't remain as party leader, frankly.
He does have a reputation of a certain paranoia, and I've got to say that is sheer, pure, unadulterated paranoia.
I recall always contrasting the private remarks of Mr. Valder with the public remarks, and that's one of the reasons why I say to you, of all the people with whom I've had to work, I have no respect for him whatsoever.
There was some very abusive language, and I don't forgive people for abusive language. That's not necessary.
For Peacock supporters, it appeared that John Valder was backing his fellow New South Welshman, John Howard.
So far as the question of the leadership is concerned, I do not have a syllable to add to the comments that I have already made on that subject, and most particularly the comments I made after the election in 1984.
It was an environment or an air where John was looming large. I always urged Andrew not to worry about that.
You trust John Howard implicitly?
Yeah, he's a very good deputy.
No way in the world that he'd challenge you, is there?
No, I don't believe, but he's a very good deputy. In any case, we work well together.
There's no way he'd challenge you?
No, I couldn't imagine that. You can either ignore it, and I would suggest to you that the majority of the time you do so at your own peril and the party's peril, or you can seek to confront it.
Andrew Peacock decided to confront John Howard, who was holidaying in the snow.
I've not done anything wrong. I've worked for 2.5 years unceasingly to get the Liberal Party back in public esteem.
Howard rushed back to Canberra, and the leadership team tried to produce a statement that he would sign.
I could not say I will never challenge over a 3-year period when there may have been circumstances in which I might have. And what is the sin in that? What is there about politics that says that you shall never, ever challenge? I think we're set on a course for a meeting on Thursday morning, and I will be asking my colleagues to re-endorse me as Deputy Leader.
Peacock decided to dispose of Howard as Deputy if he wouldn't give unconditional loyalty.
I thought it would end the destabilisation, that if the Deputy couldn't give this degree of loyalty that I thought he ought, and support, then we ought to have another Deputy. Simple as that.
There'll be 3 candidates for the Liberal Party deputy leadership: John Howard, Michael Hodgman, and a man you've possibly never heard of unless you're from Brisbane, John Moore, the party's communications spokesman, the man soon to be anointed by Andrew Peacock.
It was most extraordinary. I mean, the meeting was called, and in retrospect, he hadn't contacted the members and indicated what he had in mind or why he wanted it. He assumed that they knew.
I think I was one of 2 people, Margaret Peacock being the other, where Andrew Peacock foreshadowed that if he lost, he would resign. I still feel goosebumpy about it now. Here was the person that I had supported most strongly foreshadowing that if he went down, he would resign. And yet I knew he'd go down, because I knew he didn't have the numbers to replace John Howard as Deputy.
Only the most staunch John Howard supporters, like Senator Michael Baume, were saying he would win.
I think so. I'd expect so, and I'd hope so.
It's all been settled.
There were a couple of ballots taken, and at the end of it, the whip came back and announced that Mr Howard had been re-elected.
Andrew then left the room. I didn't go out with him because I knew the game was up, and I myself was very emotionally upset. But he came back into the room and said that he had no choice but to stand aside.
The Liberal Party's former deputy, Mr John Howard, has been elected leader of the federal opposition following a 2.5-hour meeting of Liberal MPs in Canberra this morning.
I naturally assume this job in slightly unexpected circumstances. Nonetheless, I assume it with enormous enthusiasm. On the 5th of September, what should have happened was that Andrew should not have resigned, and we both should have said to the party, we accept that what the party wants is Andrew to remain leader and you, John, to remain deputy leader, and to the extent that you have any differences, you go away and sort them out. Now, that's what should have happened, but it didn't. That I will remain the leader of the Liberal Party for so long as I deliver the goods. And if I fail to deliver the goods, anybody has the right to covet my job.
I've told him he has my full and total support. And if any one of you start to indicate that I'm dissatisfied with what he's doing, I will whack it down.
I can only say again how delighted I am to be working as leader of the Liberal Party with the 4 people who sit with me at this table. Neil Brown is somebody I respect very greatly. He's an articulate person, and I'm delighted to have him. There's only 3, is there? Yes, I'm sorry. It was just one of those days that happens in politics that nobody plans for. And at the end of the day, we were in a far worse shambles than we had been at the beginning.
I thought that under John Howard's leadership, it would be much more plain sailing. I had very great confidence in his capacity and his policy direction. And I can remember saying to my wife, well, I told you this was going to be a very tough few years. I think it's not going to be nearly as tough as I said. I think it'll be a pretty good show.
The Liberal Party had a new leader, its second from New South Wales after Billy McMahon.
The way I got the leadership, which was by accident, meant that I was never seen as legitimate by my critics and my opponents in the party, and that I think almost immediately translated itself into a pattern of leaking and destabilisation, which began within a month.
Well, John came to the leadership not entirely by accident, because he'd been seeking the leadership for a very considerable period of time. If there was any accident about it, it was simply the timing, not the event itself.
The Treasurer, Mr Keating, has announced a package of tax reform measures which he says is in the best interests of the nation and for the greater good of every individual Australian.
John Howard's first challenge came with Keating's tax reforms.
Treasurer Paul Keating has in effect asked Australians to accept some taxation nasties now, and in a year from now he'll give it all back in cuts to personal income taxes.
Howard's instincts were to support much of the package. However, Peacock supporters persuaded their new leader to try and score political points off the government. A secret strategy paper was prepared.
What has come my way today are the minutes of the meetings of the Opposition Shadow Ministry's Taxation Committee. These minutes are signed by the Shadow Finance Minister, Senator Messner.
I was amazed to see my paper reproduced in full.
Now, I'll read just a little from them. We, talking the Liberal Party, we can produce impeccable arguments for opposition to each element of the package while not opposing the whole. However, it is important to present a face of consistency and responsibility.
That, I believe, was probably the first torpedo, obviously a leak from within Shadow Cabinet because the papers were restricted, that damaged John Howard probably terminally right from the start.
Do I blame Andrew? Look, I can't prove who leaked, and when you can't prove it, you don't fling accusations around. I can say with certainty, though, that when I became the leader in September 1985, leaking started in earnest, and it continued without let or hindrance for the whole time I was leader, and it stopped when I stopped being leader.
I found that I had a significant number of pretty severely affected supporters who were still pretty outraged, and from their point of view, they did not support John. That's true.
I thought he was hopeless. He was hopeless in the Shadow Cabinet because, as chairman, he wanted to do most of the talking. He was hopeless in interpersonal communications. There was no clear sense of direction.
I had my weaknesses, and like anybody, but I do think the charge of no sense of direction, I mean, they can't have it both ways. They can't say I was directionless and yet say I was driving the party too far to the right. I mean, they've got to make up their minds.
Up in the castle, the general manager deals, talking with unions and oiling the wheels.
John Howard had a very clear sense of direction on one issue.
Peacock has reckoned that if it can get the smaller workforce it wants, if it can get them working its way, the operational cost at Robe River would be cut by 30%.
For the right, labour market reforms had become the fundamental issue. There had been union-breaking disputes at Robe River and Mudgeonbury, and the Dollar Sweets factory in Melbourne. Howard's new deputy, Neil Brown, was building a more free market labour policy, drawing hostility from the left.
You're the person who said yesterday that unemployed...
I didn't come here to have a slanging match with you.
What's your policy to do with unemployment?
Why don't you go and get a job?
Why don't you give me one? Why don't you give me one? Get out of the way.
Some members of the Business Council of Australia also expressed concern during two meetings with Liberal leaders. Ian Macphee from the party's left was there as Neil Brown spelt out the new direction.
These Business Council members were asking very good questions, and he either couldn't answer them or the answers were so dismaying.
Ian interrupted him and said, this is not party policy and you have no right to be saying this, etc., etc. It was a very firm intervention. It was very embarrassing, and it was obviously embarrassed and unsettled our guests.
Neil got pretty heated about some of this, and at one point I did say that one of his propositions was quite abhorrent, or some such word as that, which it was. It was the antithesis of working with people. It was distinctly confrontationist, and the consequences would have been quite disastrous.
I can't imagine anything more discouraging of confidence in a political party than to be having a meeting with them and there to be a row between two of the senior. I mean, if you bung on a domestic in front of the business community, you don't earn much respect.
Launching the opposition policy, Deputy Opposition Leader Neil Brown said the system was too inflexible and needed freeing up.
In May, the new industrial relations platform was announced.
We want to give people freedom to have a say for the first time in their lives about their own wages and about their own conditions of employment.
The old policy was replaced by one allowing people to opt out of the award system. It set a new direction for industrial relations.
I believe the presence of each of you here.
Howard's wages policy was welcomed on the right. It coincided with a successful anti-union campaign by the Bjelke-Petersen government in Queensland.
I don't mind, how are you? Good to see you.
But there was lingering concern that John Howard didn't have Sir Joe's common touch.
I'm all right. Where do you work?
I don't. I'm on the...
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
We're supporting the parents' benefit.
John Howard, as I said, I quite like him personally. I've got nothing against him. But he was first of all associated with a man who was a loser. He was in a government that lost election.
For 4 decades, a coalition between the Liberals and the Country or National Party was the foundation of Conservative power. Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen was to mount the biggest challenge to this coalition since Menzies founded the Liberal Party.
We must get rid of the ALP in Canberra. Only then can economic stability begin to be restored.
Just 3 hours after the polls closed, the Nationals were ready to say, "I told you so."
I've got some wonderful news for Queensland. We're going to remain strong and secure. We're going to have stable government for the next 3 years. Be no strikes, the power will stay on.
I really became worried that Joe was a huge problem on the night of the 1986 Queensland election when, against the odds, he won again in his own right. I can remember seeing him making his victory speech on television. I turned to my wife and I said, "We're going to have a terrible problem with this fellow."
I knew from moving around the States, as I moved around the States, I flew aeroplanes in and out of every nook and corner, and I knew what people were saying. I knew that they didn't believe in any of the leaders that they had at the time.
Opinion polls showed support for a Joe-led federal government, bypassing Howard and the Federal National Party.
You said you were concerned about unity. Will unity be maintained?
Well, I think that's going to depend on what happens tonight, doesn't it?
At a meeting in Hervey Bay, the Queensland Nationals resolved to break the federal coalition.
We request that the National Party Federal Parliamentary Leader, Mr Sinclair, immediately withdraw the National Party from the Federal Opposition Coalition because of basic differences in taxation and other philosophies and policies.
Sir Joe set out on the road to Canberra.
I was most concerned that what was being proposed was totally impractical, that we didn't have the structure or the time or the resources to carry it into effect, but he wouldn't listen to any of that sort of argument. It was too mundane. He was only interested in the noble concept of his providing this almost godlike leadership in Canberra.
No compromise. You can't have any tax of any sort, any new tax. Less taxes, lower taxes.
But the last word today came from Lady Flo, who seems to have half an eye on the lodge herself.
Our National Party has a little gathering down there every year, and they give out different awards. Do you know what my award was? The Hazel Hawke Award, so that I could change the curtains in the lodge.
Joe's low-tax anti-union instincts appealed to Ian McLachlan, president of the powerful National Farmers Federation. McLachlan came from an old Liberal family.
We thought there was a vacuum of power in regard to the tough decisions that needed taking. First of all, in regard to things like protection, but most importantly, in regard to things like industrial relations.
On the 8th day, Joe created the earth for Queensland.
The Joe for PM campaign wanted to run high-profile candidates across Australia. One was the former Fraser government staffer, Andrew Hay.
Well, the two elements that I found attractive were firstly that the campaign was articulating a highly conservative and rationalist economic position, many of Joe's policies having been drafted by John Stone. But secondly, it was applying pressure on the Liberal Party to drive it towards a more conservative political posture.
They came in their thousands to line over a kilometre of the shore and cheer their boys into battle.
In 1987, the America's Cup was held in Perth. During the races, Sir Joe met Ian McLachlan. He suggested that he, Joe, become Prime Minister and McLachlan his deputy.
I rang Bob Sparks and said, what the hell's going on? I mean, why this fellow's now says he's going to be Prime Minister. And Bob Sparks said, yes, well, he's got out on the end of the fishing line and we can't haul him back.
The major opinion polls at the time had us comfortably ahead, very comfortably ahead, and the major opinion leaders at the time, not only in the press but elsewhere, regarded the idea of Joe Bjelke-Petersen becoming Prime Minister of Australia as a absolute fantasy. I mean, it was the object of great derision.
We will have on this campaign people from overseas that were in my office yesterday saying we're going to follow you, Mr. Premier. We're going to state and see exactly what happens because it's so interesting and it'll be in world headlines what's happening in Australia today.
Bjelke-Petersen was being urged on by a group of businessmen and financiers on Queensland's Gold Coast. Some had been caught in the legal net of John Howard's retrospective tax legislation back in 1982.
Do you believe he will be Prime Minister?
You're asking for Michael Gore's opinion? Absolutely.
Business people came to me in Queensland and said, Joe, or Mr. Premier, we want you to come into Canberra. We'll fund you. They offered very exciting inducements in that regard.
Do you rule out at any time a coalition with John Howard?
I don't even think about it. I don't believe it's necessary. I don't believe for 1 minute be necessary because who is going to vote for the Liberal Party and pay 8% consumer tax on everything you buy?
Any attacks from people like Sir Joe on Ian Sinclair and me are doing the bidding of the Labor Party and are playing into the hands of our political enemies.
The Joe push was creating havoc in the Liberal Party. A bulletin poll put a Peacock Joe ticket 10 points ahead of John Howard and Ian Sinclair.
I haven't met with Andrew Peacock. I haven't actually spoken to him for about 12 months.
I spoke to him a few times. I'm prepared to say I rang him. He didn't suggest I do anything. He didn't suggest anything either way, as far as I can remember, that I should not do it. He just sort of said, well, what are you up to, Joe? What's going to happen? And so on.
The general feeling was that Peacock was essential to bring in traditional Liberal supporters.
Never once did Joe and I meet during that period. Journalists would ask me what I thought of Joe, and I would say to them, I think Joe is a great Australian. I think he's a very good Australian. And I have no problems with that today. I mean, if someone wants to debate that, they can with me. I'll debate them anytime. But I wasn't part of that push.
Russ Hinds and Gold Coast businessman Brian Ray were the conduit to Peacock.
Ray and Hinds were fairly confident at one stage that they had Peacock because Peacock had been to see them on Hinds' property, and they were definitely of the impression that Peacock was seriously considering coming out with a public statement saying he was supportive of the Joe for Canberra exercise.
Russ Hinds tackled me at the races on 2 occasions. Russ Hinds persuaded me to go to his home, which I did. I was looking at horses as well. He was trying to flog me a mare. And Russ had described this to me. I thought it was bizarre. I just thought it was bizarre.
For the most part, it's Mr. Kennett who abuses Mr. Howard, with Mr. Peacock trying to calm him down.
In March 1987, Andrew Peacock and Jeff Kennett held a car phone conversation abusing John Howard.
But towards the end of the conversation, Mr. Peacock is less than flattering about Mr. Howard.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've called this press conference to announce that I've dismissed Mr. Peacock from the Shadow Ministry. This follows his confirming to me the substance of the story which appeared on page 1 of today's Melbourne Sun. I found that story not only very damaging to the Liberal Party, but also implying disloyalty to me on the part of a shadow minister.
Andrew Peacock was staying low-key, but with just a spark of mischief.
Well, I've got a lot of support, yes, as friends, nothing more than that.
At the same time, Bjelke-Petersen's campaign seemed to push the Liberal Party to the right.
I'm coming out and saying this is the policy or policies that I will be supporting, and I will expect them to support those policies. If they don't support them, I'm saying here right now to all your listeners, Prue, that they can jump in the lake.
I'm the most conservative leader the Liberal Party's ever had. Somebody is claiming that I'm not conservative enough, and that really is a nonsense.
John Howard's conservative views prevailed in the shadow cabinet. Leading moderate Peter Baume resigned. The shadow cabinet had voted against him on affirmative action for women.
He has said, the most conservative leader ever, and that is true.
Shadow Minister for Communications Ian Macphee was sacked. His relationship with Howard had become increasingly bitter.
Teamwork is very important, and teamwork is absolutely essential on the front bench if you're to have it throughout the party, and I think that's a factor that everybody would understand.
As that's very, very close to being defamatory, I would like that fleshed out a bit more. I'd like to reply to that afterwards.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, you can do that.
At the stage that people like me suddenly realised what was happening, we organised something called the Liberal Forum, which had a very small effect but really couldn't stop the juggernaut, and people like me were just run over in the party room by very conservative views.
There's no doubt that the loss of Baume, on top of the Peacock sacking and the Macphee, subsequent Macphee thing, together was represented against me as a pushing of the Liberal Party to the right. But I have to say, in my defence, I did not want Baume to go.
John Howard treated me always with courtesy, and I have no concern with that. But on the other hand, when John Howard had to recast his shadow ministry in, I think it was April or May 1987, he produced what was the most ideological and conservative front bench that has ever been seen on the non-Labor side.
I have some very, very good news for you today, that the coalition is finished.
In late April, the Queensland Nationals got their wish. The coalition was scrapped.
The real culprits, the real wreckers of the federal coalition are Bjelke-Petersen and Sparks.
But at the same time, the Joe for PM campaign was running off the rails. At a secret meeting in Melbourne, Ian McLachlan, Sir Joe's preferred deputy, presented policy proposals to Sir Joe's team.
I went to the Windsor Hotel. I put the document on the table. I don't think Sir Joe ever picked it up. And he wanted to know whether I was joining them. And I said that I was very hesitant about the whole thing, about joining them. And I asked, at the end of all this, I asked him a question. I said, if you are part of a coalition win, and the National Party get less seats than the Liberal Party, who will be the Prime Minister? And he said, I will.
McLachlan obviously reacted to that outlandish statement and retired to his room and rang me from his room and said, you haven't got Joe under control. That's vital to my support for the movement. Therefore, I'm sorry to have to tell you that I'm not going to publicly support the movement. I'm not going to join the movement.
Sir Joe Bjelke-Petersen's withdrawal from federal politics will be headlined as the biggest climb down in his long career.
I've made them move faster than a bee in a bottle. And they have gone all over the place, and they've changed their direction, they've changed their policies.
The Joe for PM campaign evaporated overnight. The promised funds never materialised. Joe and John Howard declared a truce. But Sir Joe was unrepentant.
I don't believe in this impossible. It just required men with some broader vision, a bit of understanding, and acknowledgement that they were failures themselves. They had no real leader that appealed to the people. I knew, everybody knew.
The Joe for Canberra campaign could ultimately have been the precursor of a Liberal Party split. I think it's something which is still a possibility.
Meanwhile, Bob Hawke called a July federal election to catch the Liberals off guard. Hawke launched his campaign crossing Sydney Harbour to the Opera House. John Howard, starting from behind, pursued a no-frills campaign. He offered significant tax cuts.
The New Deal will help our country, individual Australians, families, farmers and businesses to get in front again.
There's a straight-out glaring huge mathematical error, which is not an issue of debate, which is worth $1,500 million to the figuring.
I am going to take it away and I'm going to analyse it, and when that analysis has been completed, I'll have something to say about it.
Please tell us, Mr. Howard. We want to know. Where is the money really coming from?
Going to the election with John Howard presenting one policy, Ian Sinclair presenting another, and Bjelke-Petersen presenting another, was an absolute farce.
My view is that there's no point in gaining government if one doesn't then make progress towards Conservative reform. And there are others who say, well, really the whole point of politics is government, that is to say, sitting in the chair of power. I don't share that view.
Tonight's result, of course, is a disappointment, but we started a campaign with virtually no commentator or pollster in the country giving us a prospect of winning.
John Howard had lost his best chance to fulfil his life's ambition of becoming a Liberal Prime Minister. Labor increased its majority from 16 to 24 seats, despite a 1% swing to the opposition.
I now intend to go and have a drink. Thank you.
The coalition split had simply produced a disaster for the Nationals, especially in Queensland.
I think all of us have learnt one very salutary lesson from last Saturday, and that is that disunity within any party or any side of politics is death, and that message has not been lost on any of us.
Well, John Howard, yes, he did blame me for losing the election, but you wouldn't expect him to blame himself, would you?
The meeting began at 10:30 and the leadership battle was over by 11.
After the election, Andrew Peacock recontested the leadership with John Howard. Howard won.
The loser was then prevailed upon to run for deputy. So Andrew and John of 83-85, and now John and Andrew 87 to whenever John decides to toss it in.
There was no new blood. If the Liberals wanted a new Messiah, they would have to look outside the parliamentary party.
Mr Elliott, who was installed as the acting Liberal president today, agreed to pursue policy debates within party confines.
My own views are now those of the party. Mr Howard, what's the view?
Well, I thought Elliott was a very unfortunate federal president for the Liberal Party, although I supported his coming into the position after the 87 election. He just couldn't play the quiet role. He really couldn't.
Oh, I think most businessmen would make terrible politicians. And I think I always found the business community totally misunderstood what was happening and how politics worked. And some of the questions I'd get from my business colleagues used to shock me. Why don't you just fix this up, get that done? It's a very different business altogether. However, I had been involved in it since 1970. And so that's even today, 24 years in the Liberal Party.
We are not getting the net private investment into our country.
John Howard, who had seen off the Bjelke-Petersen threat, now had a fresh contender to worry about. A high-profile business tycoon.
I would only consider entering after the next election if we didn't win. And I do believe we'll win, and I do believe John Howard will be Prime Minister.
John Howard and his family arrived in Adelaide this morning for a full day of campaigning.
Friction between Howard and Elliott erupted during the Adelaide by-election in early 1988, when John Elliott gave a breakfast address.
We didn't deserve to be in government. we hadn't done a good enough job. There was too much infighting. People's own personal goals were ahead of the party.
He had chosen the day before the Adelaide by-election in the city of Adelaide to dump on the Federal Parliamentary Liberal Party's performance 9 months earlier. I mean, there's got to be an end to the self-flagellation that a political party goes through in the name of political rationality. And I went for him. I said it was an irresponsible act. It was disloyal to me and unhelpful.
I don't think I ever criticised the leadership publicly, but I did at times express my view on policy matters, which usually got a warm reception wherever I spoke.
I mean, let's not muck around with tortuous explanations as to why somebody got disillusioned with me. He wanted the leadership for himself, but I think he always wanted it in sort of the day after we'd won the election.
I will not consider going into politics until after the next election.
Public fascination surrounding Elliott's ambitions increased.
It would be fascinating to be able to tell you the conversations I had with John Elliott at the races, but it would not be appropriate.
It was only when it became obvious that the loss of confidence in John Howard in the parliamentary party had reached such a point that they were worried about winning the next election and what would have happened, that I had to seriously consider it, which I did for 6 months.
About 50 gun law and public housing supporters did their utmost to disrupt the Liberals' most important campaign policy launch in 12 years.
2 days after the Adelaide by-election, John Elliott flew to Sydney for the opening of Nick Greiner's campaign in New South Wales. Greiner's key advisor was impressed.
If the Liberal Party had a messiah complex, as it had then and still has today, he was the messiah that could have delivered that for them. They certainly warmed to him. They certainly saw him as powerful. My touchstone in engaging politicians that are hot is when people want to touch them. Elliott, all that day, people wanted to come up and touch them.
Remember the graft and corruption, the ministers, the magistrates, the public figures who went to jail.
Association with Nick Greiner was useful. He was to be the only Liberal to win on the mainland in the 1980s.
For ordinary people.
He claimed to be warm and dry, an economic rationalist with a tolerance for social diversity.
Where in heaven's name have we been?
I set out to try and reconcile the two. I mean, it is an umbrella party. You've therefore got to bring along the God, Queen and Country Conservatives, as well as the small business people, usually or often of non-Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Celtic background.
Right. They were all out in the street.
Nick Greiner's views on Australian society were soon to clash with John Howard's. In July of 1988, Howard paid a visit to number 10 Downing Street. On the day he returned to Australia, he made a number of controversial statements about immigration.
There is some concern about the pace of change involved in the present level of Asian migration, and I think any government is entitled to take that into account, and it ought not to be accused of being racist.
I believe that there are some aspects of multiculturalism which have caused unnecessary division.
And the proposed Aboriginal treaty.
The very notion that a sovereign nation would make a treaty with some of its own inhabitants is to me repugnant.
It was comments such as those which brought this response from the floor.
Well, all right, you may boo me, you may do that, please, and I will be very happy. I will be very, very happy at the end of my speech to answer any questions that you would like to ask me.
What is this Australian identity that we are supposed to identify and embrace?
I became a victim of the fanatically politically correct view about immigration that you can't challenge the conventional wisdom, otherwise you become a racist. But what made it political dynamite for me was that people in my own party who were against me for other reasons used it as a stick with which to beat me. I mean, they grabbed hold of this with both hands and gave me a lot of trouble.
If you believe, as I do, that the success of the Liberal Party in its first half of its life was about its very accurate reflection of national aspirations, and indeed the Labor Party's failure to reflect those, in the second half of the 50 years you've almost had a turning around of that situation. And I think the reasons for that are basically that Conservative parties find it difficult to accept and deal with change, and especially if you're a Conservative party of a strong Anglo-Saxon bent to it, I think you find it difficult to accommodate a lot of the changes that Australia is clearly going through, whether you like it or not.
This is not a return to some era. Many of the things that I say here are very relevant.
In December 1988, John Howard released his new policy vision, Future Directions. Its principles were family values, individual initiative, equality of opportunity, and One Australia.
Future Directions gave the Liberal Party an immediate boost in its poll ratings, and is the one Liberal Party document from the 70s and the 80s that still resonates in the 90s in a positive way.
In fact, a large number of people felt distanced and alienated from it, particularly the white picket fence and the 2.4 children and the dog and the new Holden in the driveway and all the rest of it. And so I think it was an attempt to put forward a coherent policy, but it was a policy that a large section of the party couldn't live with and developed in a way which nobody else felt they had a stake in.
The campaign to draft John Elliott to the Liberal leadership had benefited from speculation about Howard's leadership. In September, a meeting was held with Elliott at his Melbourne headquarters, the Jam Factory. Nick Greiner's political minder, Ian Courtlang, was brought in.
Elliott needed a whole lot of policy coaching work. We didn't go too far that day. This was sort of round one of, putting the saddle on the back of the stallion. It really wasn't introducing him to the bit. This was getting him used to control. I mean, it's not natural for a chief executive to have that sort of control. But he put the saddle on and it felt okay, and when he started frisking, you'd go spell him and then you'd come back again.
I really didn't want to just be a minister. I had a very big job as chairman and chief executive of Elders, had a lot of responsibilities, 20 billion in turnover. Much more difficult decision for me than for other people because they weren't quite in the same position. So I had to make an assessment about whether or not there was a chance, a reasonably good chance, for me aspiring to get the job.
As John Elliott went about his public role as Liberal Party president, a stream of Liberals came to see him in private.
I would have gone to see him and the conversation would have gone something along the lines that, John, I've come to talk to you about the leadership of the Liberal Party. And I'd only ever gone to talk to him about him coming in by way of a by-election and positioning himself for leader to replace John Howard.
Nearly all of them were talking about the leadership of the party. And I suppose at least half the federal members of the parliamentary party met me. At least half.
Hello, what's the money there?
With Peacock supporters visiting Elliott, where did Andrew Peacock stand?
We had a couple of meetings working through whether I'd go into Parliament, what he wanted to do, and whether we'd be able to work together. And I think I told him that if I run, and it's dependent on the seat of Higgins becoming available, and we're able to gain the leadership, that I would want him as the deputy.
I think he finessed the wording a bit, and either I was too dumb to understand or missed the subtlety, or I was thinking of other things or something, but it went past me because at no stage, I swear to you, and I mean, I think we both accept that, and it can happen when you're talking, particularly if you're not as explicit as he thinks he was, that it went right past me.
I think Andrew was concerned that this move was gaining momentum, and in fact he raised the matter with me on a number of occasions. There used to be a saying, the jam man's coming.
To get to Canberra, John Elliott wanted the safe Melbourne seat of Higgins, once held by Prime Ministers Holt and Gorton.
I live in that electorate. It's the sort of electorate that I think suits somebody like myself, where you don't have to spend as much time with the local members.
It was now held by Roger Shipton, yet to make a real impression in Canberra. Shipton was offered inducements to stand aside.
I didn't have any direct discussions with Roger Shipton. It was left to a group of people that were influential in his electorate, and a number of Melbourne businessmen knew Roger well. I made sure that I didn't ever know what was offered to him, but I'm told he was offered board positions and interesting job opportunities and things of that nature.
Many in the party wanted Elliott in Canberra. He had political and business backers devoted to making him leader. The tide was moving away from Howard. But in the end, it came to nothing. Roger Shipton wouldn't budge.
I'm standing at the next election as the endorsed candidate. I'm going to win it, and I'm not standing aside for anybody.
There would be no new Messiah.
The seat which was supposedly going to become available did not. And I had a board of elders who were all saying, well, John, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'll give 6 months' time, I'll let you know. 6 months later, the seat was not available, so I said I won't go. Simple as that.
By now, the Liberal Party had been through 5 years of opposition. It had weathered assaults by Sir Joe and John Elliott. John Howard was making the best of it.
He's absolutely superb, I really do.
He felt he deserved some clear air in the months ahead as he prepared for the 1990 election.
My state of mind was that after 3.5 years of constant destabilisation and a constant state of siege, I had decided that not to look over my shoulder anymore, but to try and kick a few goals, score a few tries, which I proceeded to do.
John Howard found himself in the position, in fact, of being like the British in Singapore. All the guns were pointing in the wrong direction. John Howard and the press and everybody, I think, was so focused on what was happening with Elliott that nobody was paying attention to any of the signs that perhaps could have been picked up about what was happening in relation to Andrew Peacock building his support.
And the arrows now, the arrows of not only outrageous fortune, personal polls bounce off me like as though it's hitting armour plate.
As far as I'm concerned, he has my total and full and unequivocal support. I want all of us on our side of politics to ensure that we win on election day, and there will be no questioning and no differences between John and me.
I happen to believe that I'm better than anybody else leading the Liberal Party in or out of Parliament because I've got better long-term skills and I have beliefs about what I want to do for Australia. I don't just want to be Prime Minister for the buzz. I really believe in certain things about this country, and the last 3 years have made me a much stronger person. I've been to the equivalent of political hell and back.